is near. I see the light. Oh.
Meanwhile, on Videogame Nation, I become the Batman for Rocksteady's epic finale, Arkham Knight. John counts down his top 5 gaming sleuths.
And as with all great detectives, he has a Dr. Watson, a boy wonder, a sidekick.
Dan takes a look at why it's so hard to make a good superhero game.
Well, a more accurate question would be why the lack of decent licensed superhero games?
And our panel of superheroic sidekicks breaks down the Bat's career in gaming. That's this week on Videogame Nation. Shut up, Batman. This is my show. Batman is the best. I know this, you know this. Why is he the best? Because he is the Knight. Are you the Knight? No, you probably couldn't even beat bad guys unconscious or drop from the top of a high-story building and glide to a smooth landing without breaking both your ankles. Although, don't try either of those things at home, Gotham, or anywhere else. Ever, okay? But hey, it's okay that you aren't the Knight, or own approximately $13 trillion, or carve your toast into a perfect little bat symbol in the morning. This is what video games are for. When developer Rocksteady released its first Batman game, Arkham Asylum, in 2009, it reset the bar for what comic book games could be. Do you remember what Batman games were like before Rocksteady? They were really, really not good. At all. Rocksteady made Batman games cool again and then expanded on an already excellent formula with Arkham City, adding an open world, a feline companion, and a few more gadgets to the mix. With Arkham Knight, Rocksteady concludes its Batman trilogy. Once again, we have an open world to explore, but this time, it's not just a made-up subsection of a city we get to run around in, but the whole of Gotham. With the Joker dead following the events of Arkham City, Scarecrow has stepped up to unite Batman's enemies and destroy Gotham, and its sworn protector, in a single evening. And he's aided by a mysterious figure, the Arkham Knight, who has a serious vendetta against our bats. Now, Gotham may be in peril, but it has never looked better. From the neon lights shining in Chinatown to the glassy skyscrapers of Otisburg, and the way the rain falls on Batman's cape as he glides through the city, Rocksteady has created an unbelievably grimy and beautiful world. And just like it's done in previous games, the developer has stuffed that world full of DC Easter eggs and references to the wider comic book universe, which has led some fans to speculate as to whether we'll be getting a Superman game next. From Cape Crusader to Man of Steel, I'd be alright with that.
I think the obvious place for Rocksteady to go next is Superman, because no one has ever made a good Superman video game. You know, the closest is the Superman sections of Lego Batman 2, which the fact that that's the case is kind of hilarious.
Call me if you need me!
What I'd love to see would be like a cooperative game between Joker and Harlequin. So you and your friend, you choose between Joker and Harlequin, and you've got to commit crimes together. You get an open world Gotham, you get all the banks functioning, and then create real-time kind of emergent physics-based bank robberies.
But of course, the biggest new addition to Arkham Knight is the Batmobile. Its presence has been requested by fans pretty much since Arkham Asylum, and Rocksteady have finally granted their wish. And there's no denying it's cool. At any time, Batman can push a button and the car will come speeding around a corner to his location. He can use it to solve puzzles, climb walls, boost to higher levels, complete obstacle courses, and defeat the bad guys. And that's kind of my problem with it. I don't mind that the Batmobile is an option, but there are several sections in the game where you have to use it, and those sections tend to feel pretty contrived. The Riddler racetrack challenges spring to mind as an example. What, he honestly thinks that's the best way to test Batman's intellect? But really, you have to wonder whether completing platforming and stealth sections behind a wheel is exactly what players asking for the Batmobile's inclusion had in mind.
I don't like the Batmobile. The Batmobile is one of those things which is weird because it's like Batman's having a midlife crisis. He's just desperately decided to get a new car because he's got nowhere else to go with his life.
No, thank you. No, it would have been far more accurate to call that a game Batmobile, Arkham Knight, and I wanted a Batman game, not a game where you just drive a car around on roofs.
I think the tank fights are really great fun. I just love blowing them up. I love the fact you can get headshots on tanks, which is like, that's a novel concept for me, and I love it. It's brilliant.
There's a lot of whinging about the Batmobile, and I think it's ungrateful to be like, it's a Batman game. You get to drive a Batmobile. What are you whinging about? Like, that's a first world problem to me, really. Are you going to also complain that the game isn't gluten-free? What's the matter with you?
Getting into boss fights in a car wasn't really what I wanted from a Batman game. No, I'm more about beating the snot out of bad guys and being the world's greatest detective. Although, to be fair, there is plenty of Rocksteady's now legendary combat elsewhere on the streets. It hasn't changed that much from previous iterations, but then again, it didn't really need to. The main plot is, at turns, brilliant and bafflingly bad. Some of the character moments are among the best of the entire series, but Rocksteady rely on the someone just got kidnapped plot device entirely too much. I think, at some point in the game, every single person on the field gets captured by the bad guys. That's not even an exaggeration. And comic fans may be able to predict some of the bigger surprise moments before they happen, but that shouldn't diminish the enjoyment too much. Arkham Knight is a beautiful game stuffed full of things to do. It's just a shame that some of those things, sections where the Batmobile plays hide and seek with a squadron of tanks and looking at you, feel a bit shoehorned in. And it'll be a big disappointment to a lot of fans that challenges have been somewhat ignored. Still though, as Rocksteady's Arkham swan song, it does its legacy proud. And where else can you be tonight? Or look half as good in a cowl. Now, Batman might be the world's greatest detective, but that hasn't stopped John from compiling his own list of gaming's greatest sleuths.
Hello, television friends. Hi, Def. High five. Detectives, the people who can point a fluoro torch in a room and let you know if a crime's been committed or if there's been no crime. The room just belongs to a teenage boy.
In gaming, detectives are everywhere, whether they're gumshoes, flatfoots, or in Phoenix Wright's case, a lawyer. And it's always good to see a member of the bar admitting they're a private dick. Objection!
The charming, stovepipe-hatted polymath whose every move fills his companion with wide-eyed wonder.
Professor Layton is the star of a string of handheld Nintendo games and an animated movie. Gentle, well-spoken and kind, he's a genius who works at a university and from time to time goes on fabulous adventures. He's a fully qualified gentleman detective, like Indiana Jones but with more manners, less whips and a better hat.
And as with all great detectives, he has a Dr. Watson, a boy wonder, a sidekick.
In the form of his apprentice Luke, a blue-hatted, blonde-haired 12-year-old whose boyish enthusiasm just makes me want to kill.
Wow, Professor, this is amazing.
Have you seen Blade Runner? It's the movie that taught a generation of children to wear trench coats and eat ramen and test people for empathy. I might have spent a lot of time eating noodles and turning to my mates saying things like, "There's a tortoise on its back, but you're not helping it." Why is that?
In the 1997 game by Westwood, you are Blade Runner Ray McCoy, a detective tasked with hunting down replicants who've murdered animals, a serious crime in a world where most wildlife is dead and humanity is defined by the ability to relate.
The story takes place at the same time as events in the film and includes elements from the original novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
A point-and-click adventure, trench-coated, stubbly and gun-toting Ray must visit crime scenes in a city that feels grim and massive, while his enemies run around town in real time. Your actions change everything. And he's got a dog too.
Ray does suffer from one problem, which is he's not Harrison Ford, but I've never been Harrison Ford, and I got along just fine. Most detective games are about you figuring out what's happened to some other people in some kind of city.
Batman's always working for Gotham, and if all else fails, he's always got his fists. Wait, no. Not if all else fails. Not if anything fails. Gee, for someone who calls himself the world's greatest detective, Batman sure solves a lot of problems by punching them.
But Mist has you solving a family dispute on a mysterious island.
An island you came to with no explanation as to why. A dispute that'll take you over 4 different ages linked together via interdimensional books, where everything that happens is part of a puzzle you have to figure out for yourself. Of course it's a puzzle. The whole place is called Mist.
Selling 6 million copies, Mist was the highest selling PC game until The Sims came along. You can only solve a mystery once, but you can set virtual people on fire forever. Cole Phelps has everything a rookie detective needs.
A distinguished war record, natty post-war threads, and a bag of duties that'll take you from checking the gas meter in an arson case to high-speed car chases and legging it across the crumbling set of a Hollywood epic.
My favourite part is Cole's delightfully 1940s approach to forensics.
If you see a body, Cole will gladly touch it, because what are fingerprints?
And I'm a big fan of the interrogation scenes.
Which are an exercise in reading facial expressions, where's that empathy test now, and selecting what you think is the best dialogue choice, only to have Cole start screaming at a witness for no good reason.
In the storyline, he's a perfect cop. When I play him, he's bipolar. Sonny Bonds is gaming single truly by-the-book detective because his games were literally made by the book.
In Police Quest 1, half the fun is pursuing a killer called the Death Angel. The other half is following police procedure, which is an enemy far more dangerous than the Death Angel. Leave the locker room naked, the game ends. Going to drive your car, check your tyres first, or the game ends. In Police Quest 2, Sonny has a flashier car, a leather jacket and a new haircut as the star detective of the Lytton Police Department. The rules are still in place, and in Police Quest 3, a graphical update means that if you fail to subdue this naked, screaming hippie, you're going to get a lecture from Jim Walls, the game's creator and retired cop. Look at him, leaning on his squad car. He looks like he's going to give you a lecture, then put his arm around you and teach you how to whistle.
Is Sonny the best detective? Well, he's the most realistic.
And how he solves crimes while being a police officer is probably the biggest mystery of all.
Still to come on VGN, our panel of experts break down exactly why Batman is such an enduring character for the ages, and we take a look at why it's so hard to make a good licensed video game. It's only fair, really. Anyway, until then, I'm going to find some crime scenes to investigate. We'll see you in a few. That was a really bad Batman voice, I'm so sorry.
I just don't think the Batman series would be as successful if he was, you know, battling the Hamburglar.
Wait, what was that? I thought I heard something. Did you hear that?
Oh dear.
So we're agreed?
Looks fantastic.
Itch isn't going to scratch itself.
Welcome back. Now, I've loved Batman for a long time, way longer than the Arkham games or the current slate of Hollywood movies, and claiming to love Batman before he was cool is probably the most hipster thing I've ever said. At any rate, even though the world is starting to warm to comic book heroes, Batman remains the biggest of the bunch. But why is that? Aside from his obvious sunny, positive demeanor.
I think Batman's a really interesting character for gaming because obviously there aren't many characters who are both really tough and really smart. You know, you get really strong characters who are all actiony based, and then you get kind of Professor Layton type detective characters. But you rarely get a character who is able to fight a room of like 30 guys all on his own and then, you know, solve a murder in that same room.
But he also works as a game character because he has really natural limits. So he can't fly, he can't fire laser beams out of his eyes. What he can do is work really, really well with an environment. He uses his grappling hook, he can climb. So all of his powers work within video game dynamics. They work well as mechanics within a game.
People tend to forget he's the world's greatest detective, so that just lends itself to, you know, following waypoints and sleuthing and stealthing and doing things sneakily. But just the mechanics of how Batman works in the comics and in the films, they just lend themselves to games perfectly, like hiding in corners, jumping on enemies from above, beating them to within an inch of their death, but not killing them. It's just perfect for games.
I think part of the appeal is the villains. They're just so brilliantly drawn and imaginative and sinister. Like, you know, if you look at the Joker, there's something so unnerving about that whole concept behind that villain. And I just don't think the Batman series would be as successful if he was, you know, battling the Hamburglar.
I think until the Arkham titles, Batman didn't really have a great game. The best one is still the Sunsoft Batman game on the NES, which was just a really fun side-scrolling beat-em-up. It doesn't do anywhere near as good of a job of capturing the character or the license as well as the Arkham games do, but it was a fun, good game that was enjoyable, which is more than you can say for pretty much every other Batman game.
I don't know about best game, but the most memorable game that Batman has been in for me is definitely Gotham City Racer on the PS1, which is one of the most terrible video games ever created. Like, if you want to complain about the Batmobile in like the new Batman game, you need to play this one on the PS1 because it is just appalling, really awful. And the best thing though is that it's, for me, the sound effects, which it just sounds like a chainsaw being murdered as you go around the track. It's just absolutely awful.
My favourite Batman game before that was I think it was 1989 Batman the movie tie-in by Ocean Software. It kind of followed the events of the film, so you're against the Joker. But it was one of those like wonderful games you used to get in the 80s where it was like one level was a scrolling platformer and one was a car level. And it was just, I loved those games in the 80s when you couldn't afford that many games and there weren't that many games around and you got to try lots of different genres in one title.
I actually like Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, the fighting game, which had Batman in, because he had an amazing fatality, which was called Bat Swarm, in which he just summoned bats to attack the opponent. And I don't think that's an ability Batman has anywhere else in the Batman universe. The power to control bats and summon them? Maybe, I don't know. But I really liked it. I don't think it kills them either. I think it just bothered them a lot.
Batman wins. Flawless victory.
The best one was that 1986 isometric one. Do you remember that? It was very. It wasn't really a Batman game because it was Batman, but he just sort of potted around collecting stuff, and there were some weird monsters. But when I first played it, I went around a mate's house and he had it on the Amstrad PCW, which is an incredibly random machine. But he had a colour screen, not a green screen, so you've got a Batman game with. I'm so old. I'm so old.
Nolan or Arkham? That's a really hard question. I'd say that both of them sort of hit their high point with the second chapter of the three, and both of them had a bit of a damp ending. I would say that the Arkham series was a little bit more consistent. I think Arkham Knight is better than The Dark Knight Rises. I think Nolan's Batman at least did something different with it, so it kind of stands out a little bit more. So it's a really hard thing. It's almost even.
I prefer the Arkham game trilogy. That's got Kevin Conroy as Batman, and Kevin Conroy is Batman, much like Mark Hamill is the Joker. Because I grew up with the Batman animated series, so that sort of gothic world. There's almost sort of Tim Burton-esque as well, because I grew up with that series. So that's my Batman, and Kevin Conroy as Batman in anything. That's perfect.
I definitely preferred the Arkham trilogy. I found the Nolan stuff. It was very dark. It was quite hard work. Especially the Bane stuff. He sounded like an obese frog with a 40-a-day habit.
I'm gonna go with Arkham just because you're actually, like you are Batman. And like, let's be honest, gaming is always better than film because you can be the person rather than just sitting there watch some other dude be really awesome. I want to be awesome.
I think what Rocksteady have done with Batman as well is they've really kind of explored the character in interesting, unique ways. I think they've really built on that, on the kind of the mythos of Batman in a really interesting way, and just to be part of it as a player, standing on top of the buildings in Gotham and looking out over that city, and living it, I just think it's kind of extraordinary. It's kind of what I've wanted to do ever since I first read, Frank Miller's Dark Knight all those years ago.
Superheroes and video games should be a perfect fit, like this. But the sad reality is more like this. Oh, why can't they just get along?
There are, of course, exceptions like Batman, Batman, and Spider-Man. But still, decent superhero games are about as rare as people who like Iron Man 2.
Why? Because Iron Man 2 was terrible. Oh, you mean why the lack of decent superhero games? Well, a more accurate question would be why the lack of decent licensed superhero games?
For some reason, games featuring original superpowered characters tend to fare pretty well. Bayonetta creator and excellent Twitter curmudgeon Hideki Kamiya struck gold twice. First with the witty, cinema-inspired heroics of Beautiful Joe for Capcom in 2003, and then again a decade later with Wii U exclusive The Wonderful 101. This highly misunderstood gem takes the concept of strength in numbers and runs with it in so many unique and ingenious ways that it's almost exhausting in its breathless creativity.
Then you've got Infamous and Prototype, two similarly themed games about normal folk gifted with powers they didn't ask for. Just like me and the way I can make muffins appear simply by thinking about them.
What both games lack in subtlety, they make up for in power fantasy fulfillment, putting near godlike powers at your fingertips and leaving you free to wreak havoc on a scale that Michael Bay would deem excessive. Neither game's leads can really be considered heroes unless you think causing widespread civilian fatalities constitutes heroism, in which case some nice people from MI5 would love to get in touch with you.
As it happens, Prototype shares plenty of corrupted DNA with a licensed superhero game, namely 2005's The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction, which has the dubious distinction of being the only good game dedicated to the mean green smashing machine.
Ultimate Destruction succeeded because it played to the Hulk's strengths, in this case, his strength, which is something pretty much every decent superhero game has in common. But simply replicating a reputable hero's abilities isn't enough. It's applying those incredible, impossible abilities to a game that makes the most of them.
As the Arkham games prove, the best way to do that appears to be by handing the license to a talented developer with a genuine affinity for the source material, and then giving them the time, money, and resources they need to do the character justice. But what do I know?
Most modern superhero games are casualties of notorious supervillain duo, corporate greed, and publisher cynicism. Thanks to the cost of acquiring a superhero license, development duties are usually handed to cheap studios who can knock out barely playable games to tight deadlines. The end result is the game the publisher needs, but not the one players deserve.
It's quite ironic that the hero who's been on the receiving end of the most critical kickings is also one of the most powerful and iconic in comic book history. Howard the Duck. No, wait. Superman.
Ever since his debut on the Atari 2600, where technical limitations meant that he looked more like Lex Luthor with a giant tapeworm problem, poor Kal-El has been to gaming what Kryptonite is to him. The most heinous example is Superman 64, a buggy, tedious, fog-ridden mess of a game that's widely and rightly regarded as one of the worst games of all time.
You could say that Soup's biggest strength as a comic book character is also his biggest weakness as a game character. He's the very definition of OP, which makes it very tough to build a challenging experience around him without introducing some convenient plot device that hobbles him in some way, at which point he stops being Superman. Considering it's been 9 years since the last full-fledged Superman game, it seems that this is one great power that nobody's willing to take responsibility for.
It's telling that some of the better superhero games out there are those that make no effort to capture the essence of a particular character and choose instead to throw a bunch of them together to fight for our entertainment. Ever since Capcom applied its Street Fighter expertise to mutants with the excellent X-Men Children of the Atom, we've been treated to a number of above-par punch-ups, including Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, the Marvel vs. Capcom games, and Injustice: Gods Among Us.
But even these glorified pub fights can't compare to a game that makes us feel like we've been pulled into the page, but as I've established, those are very few and far between. Every great superhero deserves their Batman moment. It's just a pity that the people holding the purse strings don't seem to agree.
And that's it for another episode. I'd love to stay and chat, but well, who's going to keep this city safe if I'm here yakking with you guys all day? Much as I'd like to, of course. If you've got something to say or a supervillain to vanquish, tweet at us using the hashtag VGM, check out our Video Game Nation Facebook page, or just send up a bat signal, and we'll see you next time.
I am Gotham's reckoning.
Well, she's certainly glamorous, and if gesturing at stuff counts as assisting, she's that too. Carol Smiley on Wheel of Fortune, tonight at 9:05 on Challenge.
I might be a